So what I was trying to describe in the video was you start by placing the tip at the bottom of the proximal box. You let the material, as it extrudes, you're withdrawing the tip. It's almost like the tip is being pushed back out of the cavity. Once the box is filled, I will, on this diagram, just, go across the occlusal towards the mesial in one relatively quick stroke, and there you have it. So that process right there is 3 to 4 seconds, and the cavity is filled. No need for a liner, a flowable liner to be adapted and cured. No need for several increments to be adapted and light cured, all that effort and time that it takes to do that. This cavity is completely filled at this point. And so the next slide shows this compo roller. If you have an interest in that, I'm quite fond of that. There's different shapes to the tips. And here, again, I want to disclose this is an instrument kit from American Eagle, which I designed for them, and I do have a financial interest in that product. You may already have instruments that work for you. This is 5 instruments that I designed and work really well for me. And in terms of the press and wipe, you can use either the compo roller like you see in the top picture, or you use the round end condenser in the bottom picture. And you don't spend a lot of time with that, just as you saw in the video. In fact, I spent more time in the video than I normally do. This was a teaching thing, and I had a lot to cover there. But when I'm not talking, this is a very rapid procedure. You don't have to get all the excess removed. So I'll then proceed to the sculpting, and you can see how I will take the bladed plastic instrument and using the existing 2 structure as a guide plane, and all you're doing is extending those exterior enamel walls down into the fossa, into the fissures. Because this material has such a lovely texture to it, it's still quite soft, but yet does not slump, and it absolutely doesn't stick. And this has to do, both of these features are a result of the fact that you are shaping this and creating the anatomy while this is still in an activated state. It has not returned back to that very high viscosity state yet. And then we'll go ahead and cure it. And this is another, I wanted you to refer back to that diagram where I showed that the recovery period, whereas the material, when activated, drops instantaneously in as far as viscosity is concerned, the recovery is much slower, and so you are actually curing this material while it's in an energized state. And what that does is it changes polymerization kinetics. And a lot of the issues regarding shrinkage stress as a result of this polymerization, which is done very rapidly on a large volume of material, has to be rewritten because it, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I believe this has a significant effect. I'm using a high output LED light, 1,000 milliwatts per centimeter squared, because all bulk fill instruments really need to be adequately cured, and this assures me of that. So I only do 10 seconds and then remove the matrix band and go to removing the excess. I like the 12 scalpel blade, 12 blade on a scalpel handle, does it very quickly. This is under-cured, meaning it's only 10 seconds, but the occlusal surface is certainly hard. It's certainly bonded. Nothing's going to move. It's just going to be easier to remove the excess before giving it the final cure. As far as using discs are concerned, the only place you would use a disc is if you have access to these embrasures, these occlusal proximal embrasures. If your proximal box hasn't broken contact, why, you wouldn't even do this step. But I would use the second, not the coarse one, but the medium and the fine, and I'd be done with that. Now, as far as finishing the occlusal surface, once again, It's slightly undercured, so this helps in terms of finishing those occlusal margins. And my intent is not to remove the flash, but to feather the flash. And so this is quickly done with a carbide burr. I don't want to use a diamond and risk scratching or removing enamel. So we use a carbide burr, and it removes it very easily. So I'll then finish the cure, and it's important to give a 10-second cure from the buccal, another 10 seconds from the lingual, and then finally I'll give it another 10 from the occlusal. So if we add this all up, where we've used 10 seconds at the beginning and now 30 more, we've got a total of 40 seconds. And again, reality has found that this is adequate to cure the material in the proximal box. So this is what we have at this point, fully cured and very smooth surface. We'll take the rubber dam off, adjust the occlusion. It's rare to have very much of this. If I have to adjust the occlusion, it's almost always on the marginal ridge. So it's hard to predict where that opposing cusp comes into play, but rarely do I have any internal because of the ease of sculpting accurate morphology because of the handling characteristics. At this point, I don't really do anything other than use one of these single finish polish points. You can, of course, if you want, use one system where you go from a coarse grit to a very fine grit. But I find the single instruments, rubber type instruments such as the ProGloss polisher, and there are others on the marketplace, will smooth where I've adjusted and used the carbide burr, which in this case would be on the marginal ridge and then around the margins where I've feathered them out. This is used wet, and it's very quick. I don't bother going for the high polish. As you'll see a little bit later, I really don't feel it's necessary with this material, and I'll explain why. So here you have a 2-year post-op looking just fine.